Welcome back, I'm Tedward, and today, thanks to Bond Group, we're starting Bonnet up on this 2002 Aston Martin DB7 Vantage Volante. It's powered by a 5.9 liter V12, and these are a bargain. I'm serious, these are like under $30,000 in a lot of cases, and if you're looking to get yourself into a cool British roadster or coupe, you can get the coupe as well, these are becoming so affordable, and the running costs aren't that crazy, especially if you're a DIY guy who's not necessarily taking it to an Aston Martin dealer, because if that's the case, well, bets are off. But these are really cool, and they came with manual 6 speeds, but don't click away, this one has a 5-speed automatic. Now, we've driven the more rare 6 speeds a couple times on the channel before. However, today I want to get a taste for what this is like in its natural form, because honestly, this automatic is what you're more likely to find on a DB7. So first, because I've got the bonnet up, and I did that because it is so hot to open this when the engine has been running. I just drove it over here, and you have to use this little latch right there. I don't want to burn myself on camera. I will probably yelp. But this is essentially 2 Ford Mondeo V6s sandwiched together. But I believe that's to your benefit, because if you start crossing part numbers from Ford to Aston Martin, you may be able to get away with things for a heck of a lot cheaper. Now, do your research on that. Don't take my word for it, but I have had a few people tell me, you know, this looks awfully similar to the Ford part number, and I bet you could get away with maintaining this pretty darn well. Now, this is a Scout power plant. Sure, it might cost a little money to do coils and plugs and things like that. However, these don't have rod bearing issues. They don't just blow up. These actually just run. The things that typically are detrimental on these cars financially are cosmetic. I mean, it's like if you bust up a bumper cover, you know, this one's got some scratches here and there. Definitely seen the business end of a curb or a speed bump. There's some cracking there, but nothing crazy. This is definitely in decent condition. This is actually Tay gold as far as I know. And interior, again, this is just where things can sometimes go a little south, but this one is in phenomenal shape. So if you find one in good shape, I honestly wouldn't hesitate to pick one up if this is something that you're actually passionate about, because this would have been somewhere in the high $100,000, nearly 200 grand back in the day, and now you're getting these for the price of like an E46 M3. The DB7 was brought out in a time when Aston Martin was kind of struggling. They're owned by Ford. Ford used a lot of parts bin things on there, so the switchgear inside will look familiar if you're an old Ford person. These taillights come off of a Mazda 323. I think I mistakenly said 626 in my last DB7 video. Sorry, it's just what was on my mind. And inside, Miata door handles, and the original 4-speed auto that used to come in the older versions, I think pre-99, I think that was out of a Hummer. I mean, there's just bizarre things that they use to get these things running. And in fact, the chassis is a modified version of a Jag chassis that I think dated back to 1975. So what's wild about it is that it all culminates in a pretty lovely grand touring driving experience. I like driving this car. It is not a screaming loud V12 like some Lamborghini or Ferrari might imply. When you hear V12, that's usually what you're thinking about. But it is a sort of lazy, low-end, grunty engine that just disappears behind the scenes. And you get to say you own an Aston Martin. So despite being a car where there wasn't infinite money to create the thing and make it all these bespoke parts, I honestly think this car came out pretty darn well. It's a beautiful look, and what's wild is it's so beautiful that Ford ended up stealing that grille down the line, because that is a quintessentially Aston Martin grille, but it's something that stood the test of time, and they made this design language phenomenal. If you want to go for the very high end, the Zagato versions, the DB AR1s, those are trading for quite a lot of money, and it's the same car. Sure, there's an upgraded clutch on the AR1s, and some, of course, beautifully coach-built stylistic design license taken by Zagato to change the appearance, but this is no slouch, and it certainly will turn heads. And while, of course, it's fun to pick out the little things that they use to save money, like taillights or door handles or even transmissions, let's not forget the current Aston Martin lineup uses a Mercedes V8. So it's not like this was just this weird little blip on the radar where they were trying to save money. They are still doing it today. But anyway, it's my job to show you how it drives, because maybe this will inspire you to pull the trigger on a car that you've been thinking about, or maybe you'll think, oh, that's not what I thought it was, and walk away. And I think really that's as much as I can do for anybody in this job, is to either steer them towards something, inspire them, or make them run for the hills. So let's get this thing started up. We've got our key in the ignition. We're gonna turn this all the way. We get all of our lights, and then our engine start stop button down here jumps to life. We've got battery, fuel, our tack and speedo. I love that it goes up to 190. It really goes up to 200, but it's cool to see that number. And then oil pressure and water temperature. It's a very touchy throttle. I think that's the number one thing I've noticed about this car, is that it really wants to just rev right off the rip. Now, you do have some cup holders, and there we go. You know, some little things, especially interior pieces, don't always work the best, but you've got your ashtray with your little cigar lighter. Very nice. Try not to light that up. We don't need any extra fire in here. And then sort of cheapo switchgear, but it's all behind this nice wood trim and leather veneer. I think this is great, and I like the light interior, despite the fact that, yes, it does reflect off the windshield. That is kind of annoying. This steering wheel, I think these are the strangest shapes. They kind of protrude, they come out, so when you're like this, first of all, it's a fairly small diameter, and second, the heels of your thumbs kind of just sit right here. In the trunk, some decent space. You've got the Aston Martin Premium Audio to let you know that some options were purchased, and a dual exhaust that isn't shouty and obnoxious. It definitely lets you know it's there, but it's not going to overwhelm the experience. This has an interesting handbrake. Of course, it's on this side of the seat, and it's very annoying because it means that you can't reach the buttons very well for the seat controls, and that is actually as low as the seat goes. I do feel like I wish I could go a little lower as far as seating position goes. But I had someone call me the other day from a Vanquish, and they could not get the handbrake down, and I had to teach them how to do it. So here it is. You'll see it's in park. We pull up right till the tension, push the button, and down, and there you go. Now it's off. To engage it, we just pull up. It's engaged. Push down to disengage, pull up till you feel tension, button, down, and we're off. Let's see how this automatic transmission gets off the line. It's a lot of torque, 420 horsepower. It's all going to the rear wheels. That's plenty quick. A little bit of wheel spin off the line, but it doesn't cut power. It allows for that little chirp. The chassis definitely feels a little more flexible than its successor when we came out with the VH platform. DB9 and subsequent Vantages all feel quite a bit tighter. But I think some of the compliance in this chassis actually lends a hand to its luxury feel. So as we approach this traffic, let's talk about transmission. I think the transmission shifts are fine. They're smooth, it's a ZF, and I mean, it's not like a modern CF, but it's not ratcheting off shifts, but it's not that slow. But this is not some Tiptronic gearbox where I've got little buttons or paddle shifters behind the steering wheel. No, you can select if you want it to go to overdrive, 4th, 3, or 2. But that's it, and that's kind of a weird thing to do unless you're just going downhill and trying not to use your brakes. And we're in normal mode right now. There is a sport mode, which will presumably change the tune of that gearbox just a bit. Yeah, it's like a little snappier in a way that's almost too much. I think in normal mode it actually drives well, because what happened over the years, car makers started dulling out their comfort modes to a point where they wanted to make the biggest dynamic range between comfort and, let's say, Sport Plus in modern terms, which meant that if you were in like an eco or comfort mode, they were almost undrivable because you'd have to use like this much pedal travel to get the thing off the line. And then they shift way too early, they're awkward. Whereas in the early 2000s, normal mode was just normal. Sport would just make the throttle map a little more aggressive, oftentimes too aggressive, and maybe the transmission tune a little silly. So this being a sporting car, but not necessarily a sports car, I think normal mode suits it just fine. Especially because this engine, this V12, it's not some 9,000 RPM monster. No, it revs to like 6,500 RPM, and it's designed to just sort of lumber along in the background. Think Bentley or Rolls-Royce. Gets them to speed a little faster than you even anticipate. And what's interesting is the seating position way back here. There's a lot of car in front of me, and I notice it most in a corner. But honestly, this automatic transmission suits the car pretty well. It doesn't need to be snappy and sharp like a DCT. It just needs to allow power to be transmitted when asked for, and there's so much torque that it's just there. So sure, would I rather row my own gears? Yeah. I think that's the better choice, but the margin of better isn't as astronomical as I had anticipated. This actually fits, and I can see why the take rate on the auto is higher than the manual. Granted, maybe its clients back then were a little older. You know, you're thinking successful people in the late 90s, early 2000s, probably just a certain age range that maybe doesn't want to be rowing gears anymore, and they wanted a luxury experience from their show-stopping DB7. I've driven some ratty ones in the past, and they had lots of rattles and stuff, but it goes to show, like, some are better than others. This one seems really tight. It's got about 24,000 miles on it, and it's definitely been well maintained. on the highway, obviously great visibility with the top down, but it's so stable, it's planted, it's pretty quiet. Wind noise is minimal because I've got my little shield back here and the windows up. I don't have the side windows up, but that's fine. Even without those little quarter glass pieces, the rear glass, it's still really manageable. I can stay out here for hours and not be annoyed by wind noise. Yeah, it's a cruiser, man. This thing just wants to go out and stretch its legs. Here's what I'm thinking. I think DB7s are going to become a little more common on the road. I think people that spent the money years ago maybe put some of them away and aren't driving them, because it's a bummer when you've got a depreciated thing, or if you haven't driven it in a while and you start to realize that if you bring it to your Aston dealer, it's going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars to get it up and running. But the savvy dreamer is the perfect buyer for a DB7. Someone who's got Ford background, who knows their way around a parts catalog and knows how to do stuff themselves and isn't afraid to get dug in deep on something that could potentially be a risk, but likely won't be if they're smart about it. Now, again, I think the manual is the better option just for the driving experience and enjoying rowing your own gears. But if you see one of these things pop up with an automatic, it's not a dog. It's really not. So if you just got to get your hands on one and something comes up and it's an absolute steal, because I'll tell you, these autos are going to go for cheaper than the manuals, don't hesitate. This thing is kind of good and you can use it. You can probably have lower running costs or equal running costs to your like E46 M3, and you get a V12 with classical British styling. So let's use the Ford switchgear to our advantage, because maybe that saves you money and allows you to get into one of these things without being terrified. So thank you so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Don't forget to respect the drive. Thanks to Bond Group for letting me drive this thing, and I'll see you in the next one.